Hello and welcome to episode 594 of the official EstablishTheRun.com podcast. My name is Adam Levitan, as always, joined by Evan Silva. Today, we have a very, very special guest. This is an old friend of the show. You may remember him from his time working with us here at ETR. You perhaps know him from Pro Football Focus. You perhaps know him from his current home at FantasyLife.com. It is the utilization king himself, Dwain McFarland. Dwain, how's it going, buddy?
Man, it is going great. We've got training camps going. We're talking football. I'm hanging out with you two guys. Like, I couldn't ask for a better day, Levitan. Thank you.
Yes, we did this episode last year. I thought it was really helpful and came out really well. Wanted to run it back. Evan, how's it going today?
Going really well. It's good to be hanging out with one of the most intense, in-depth fantasy analysts in the game, Dwain McFarland. I'm ready to get after it.
I want to take 1 second here to just throw at you guys a concept that I think is widely known and accepted, but maybe not. And the concept is, to me, wide receiver fantasy points are scored through talent, through being good. And that's why we had Matt Harmon on to evaluate ability of wide receivers. At the running back position, however, fantasy points are scored through opportunity. If you're an NFL running back and you have the right role, the right number of touches in the right spots, you're going to produce. And that's why we want to have Dwain on here to talk through a bunch of tricky running back opportunity spots. Dwain, would you agree with that concept that I just said?
Overall, yes, because you can not be a very talented running back, but if someone turns around and hands it to you, and it's a job of 10 other players to now block for you, that's different than saying, hey, go isolate out against that cornerback. You've got to be on the same page with your quarterback around what coverage is. Then you've got to beat press coverage. Then you've got to, have the trust of the quarterback that, you can still catch the ball and contest it. There's so many things that go into wide receiver. And I do agree. And the research has shown this. It is more talent driven. What I will say, though, for running backs, if you're super talented and you get the opportunity, that's still better. Yeah. Nick Chubb in a full-time role is still better than, Malik Davis in a full-time role. It still matters. There truly are difference makers at the position for fantasy. But yeah, the bigger portion of it is coming from volume. The one other thing I would say is where it really, really shows up, and you've talked about this before, Adam, but it's in the receiving department.
Yeah.
You don't find many backs that can earn targets at a high level like an Eckler, like a CMC. So again, though, we're getting back to what word? Receiving. And so I do think talent becomes a bigger factor when you find these guys that can year in and year out demand these sort of target shares on their team. So that's something that's definitely in play and we've got to consider.
For sure. So on today's show, we are going to go through some running back situations where we think it's a little bit muddy. It's a little bit convoluted. We need to talk through exactly how these guys are going to be used and what their outlook is. Before we get into it, reminder that God's Game, aka preseason DFS, returns this Thursday. Showdown slate for Browns Jets, 50K to first on DraftKings. To be clear, preseason DFS is a completely one-off product here at ETR, needs to be purchased separately if you are interested. Projections, depth charts, live show, top plays, underdog, prize picks, pick 'em notes. Check it all out on EstablishTheRun.com. Also, want to give a quick shout out to our friend JJ Zacharison's pod, the Late Round Fantasy Football Pod. I honestly don't listen to or recommend many fantasy football podcasts, but if you like our podcast, I suspect you will like his as well. He's very good at reviewing historical data and conveying how it applies to this season, especially for season-long formats. Episodes are focused and quick. If you're looking to add another podcast to your rotation, search Late Round Fantasy Football Pod wherever podcasts are found.
JJ packs a ton of information into concise podcasts.
Yep. Okay. Want to start here, Dwain, with Nick Chubb. Now, Nick Chubb started this draft process, as a late second round, third round pick. Evan and I think both thought that was completely egregious, and the market has agreed with us to the point where now Nick Chubb is often going at the 1-2 turn. The concern, I think, that people have is Nick Chubb's historical receiving baseline has been pretty non-existent. I'm not sure if that means he can't, but he has not in his NFL career. But with Kareem Hunt gone and only Jerome Ford behind Nick Chubb, we are projecting a career high in simple touches for Nick Chubb this year behind the top three offensive line. Dwayne, would you agree that Nick Chubb deserves to be going at the 1-2 turn despite the concerns around his receiving profile?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a few reasons for it. I agree. Like his receiving profile is not great. So like when I break down running backs, I really break it down into like their rushing profile pedigree, meaning have coaches trusted them in all situations on the ground, short down and distance, can they score the touchdowns, all that. Then there's like, how good are they? Like how well did they perform when given the opportunity? But I do the same thing for receiving. And so I break it down into really those 4 quadrants. There's other things like the size and there's things that we look at. But with Chubb, he's never really been a good wide receiver, but it's not like, it's not like it's an overall detriment to where you just can't draft him because of what you were just talking about with Kareem Hunt being gone. People forget like Kareem Hunt was not good last year, but if you looked at it in the year before and the year before, we probably had 2 of the top, and this is not joking, like 2 of the top 6 most talented backs playing in the same backfield. Like, how often do we get that? So I've heard a lot of people say, well, Nick Chubb, he got his 300 carries last year. Yeah, well, you were drafting him as a 3rd-round pick. If you knew Nick Chubb was going to get 300 carries last year, you would have drafted him at the 1-2 turn. And I think we can feel pretty comfortable with that. And the other thing I would say is even though Kareem Hunt took a step back last year, he was still annoying. He got carries inside the 10. He got carries inside the 5. I don't think Jerome Ford's going to get much of that. I've seen a contingent out there that's like, no, man, Jerome Ford's taking over the Kareem Hunt role. I'll believe it when I see it. I think Jerome Ford's going to be involved, but this is a 5th-round rookie. This is not Kareem Hunt. And so I think people just forget how good he was. So Chubb is honestly, I think you can make an argument. He's the best runner in the league. Like he's just shown us like over the last 5 years. So I like everything about him. I wish he caught more balls, but I think you could have a Derrick Henry type year where you don't have to catch 60 balls to be the RB1 overall. Like that could happen for Nick Chubb. And also like he's going to catch more than he caught last year, like just by not having Kareem Hunt around. So do we expect him to suddenly get 100 targets? No, but he might get an additional 15 to 20 targets, and that 80% of those are going to be caught. Like that's just, those are nice little pluses. So I feel really great about him. I have him as my number 3 RB overall in my rank. So I like him at the 1-2 turn.
Yeah, I have him 4th overall for my running backs. Evan and I will talk more about our round 1 rankings in a little bit here. Evan, I know you've been on Jerome Ford also here. I think you can be on Jerome Ford and on Nick Chubb both. I think there's enough room for both.
On Jerome Ford is like a late round pick.
Yeah.
I'm all in on Nick Chubb as like a top 15 overall player. He's the favorite to lead the NFL in rushing at DraftKings Sportsbook. As Dwayne said, he's just going to catch more passes because Kareem Hunt is gone. Jerome Ford is interesting. I mean, he's 220 pounds. He was recruited to play at Alabama initially, wound up at Cincinnati, had a big senior season. He didn't catch that many passes, though, in college, and he's never caught a pass in the NFL. So I'm with Dwayne. I'll believe it when I see it, Jerome Ford in the Kareem Hunt role. I'm not totally sold on that either.
Last thing I want to say here is that from a projection standpoint, Nick Chubb has averaged 5.2 yards per carry for his career. That's the 2nd most in modern football history behind only Jamal Charles. We do not project guys to average 5.2 yards per carry. We have him as a massive outlier, though, still, and he's still popping off as like one of the best running backs. So, and I think that over 5.0 yards per carry is going to be pretty sticky considering the Browns' offensive line, environment, run scheme, etc. All right, let's go to Tony Pollard. Now, a lot of this is contingent on who or what they add to the backfield. As it stands now, though, Ronald Jones is suspended 2 games. They have Malik Davis, who Dwayne already made fun of. Tony Pollard, we have not seen him in a full-blown featured role often. When we have, he has completely smashed. Dwayne, what do you think about how Dallas sees Tony Pollard this season?
Yeah, I love Pollard. And honestly, like if they signed Zeke tomorrow, I think Tony Pollard's ADP should be around where it is now. I feel like really he should be going. It's so funny. We've waited so long for Tony Pollard to have this clear runway, and now we're all afraid. We're like, oh yeah, we all know he's an RB1, but no, we're just going to still take him in the 2nd round. And I get it. It is associated with the names that are available, and maybe the Cowboys bring someone in. Rojo's now suspended for the first 2 games of the season, so it is likely Malik Davis right now as the true backup to Pollard. But I just love the talent, and I love the offense that he gets to play in. So this is one of those rare players that checks off all the boxes. So like if you go back and you look at historically the running backs that pop off for a top 3 finish, and they give you that true league winning upside, right? I know the words league winning get used too often, but Tony Pollard truly does check all of those boxes, right? Hyper explosive player. He's going to break a lot of long runs, very usable in the passing game, not quite like at an Eckler or CMC level. He's a notch below that, but still really close to it. And the Cowboys could use him more there, right? You've got Dalton Schultz now gone. Yes, they do bring in Brandon Cooks, but if you notice, like sometimes where players battle, right, for the targets, tight end and running back is an area where sometimes you see a really good tight end, you won't have a good, a running back doing much in the passing game. So I think there's room for Pollard, to pick up, steam in the passing opportunities. Plus, we had this pesky thing last year with Zeke where he was getting the long down and distance work. Pollard took over the 2-minute offense, but I think even if they bring Zeke back, it's on a drastically reduced contract. He no longer carries that sway, right? Which is Jerry Jones has to play him because he screwed up and gave him way too much money. That's all gone, right? Yeah. So I think no matter who they bring back, Pollard, I would keep drafting him where he is now, but we know his ADP will probably fall some. So we would just be able to buy the dip. But I've honestly been mixing him in at the 1-2 turn just to build, and best ball specifically, trying to make some different builds. So like, I think there's a really good chance Pollard's the best player on the Cowboys, not CeeDee Lamb. And I love CeeDee Lamb. So like when some people are like, go CeeDee Lamb and Amon-Ra every time, it's like, I've had drafts where I'm like, I'm going to take Amon-Ra and take Tony Pollard. Sure. Right. So I think he's that good. He just checks all the boxes, explosive playmaking ability, his ability in the passing game. There's just, it's hard, honestly, to find anything not to like. I know there's the rumors, don't give him 300 carries. We don't need 300 carries, guys, from Tony Pollard for him to be the RB3 overall.
That's what I was going to say. Similar to Christian McCaffrey and Austin Eckler, who have big back compliments and are still clear cut, to me at least, top 7 overall fantasy picks. Tony Pollard can have an Ezekiel Elliott or some other big back with him and still absolutely smash. Brandon Thorne has the Cowboys offensive line back among the elite, number 6 overall. I agree with you that, people were poo-pooing Tony Pollard. I had to try to convince people to play Tony Pollard in DFS last year in games when Ezekiel Elliott were out. They were like, didn't you see this quote from the running backs coach? He said Tony Pollard's a sports car and sports cars don't get more than 20. I was like, guys, we're not looking to gift horse in the mouth here. We're taking Tony Pollard. So yeah, I think agreed.
My most drafted running back right now and best ball. I'm well over 20%. So I love it.
Similar, I think, to the Christian McCaffrey and Eckler roles for Pollard. Okay. Evan, I want to go to you first on Rhamondre Stevenson. I know you've been maybe a little bit higher than some of the rest of us on Rhamondre. My concerns on Rhamondre have been they have been linked to so many running backs. They have said they thought Rhamondre wore down a little bit last year, and on a bad team that I'm not sure is going to score a ton of touchdowns. I do have concerns there for Rhamondre. Obviously, he was one of our favorite picks of all of last season. That was in the 8th, 9th, 10th round. Now he goes 3rd round typically. So Evan, go ahead on Rhamondre, and then I want to get Dwayne's take.
Well, this is a little bit off topic, but I almost feel like there's a shortage of running back talent in the NFL because we're talking about all these completely unproven backup RBs like Jerome Ford and the guys that they have in New England right now, like Pierre Strong and Ty Montgomery, he's already hurt, and Ty Chandler in Minnesota. And I don't know, it just seems like the running back depth charts seem to be more shallow than usual this season. And I think that extends to New England. And I'm with you. It's a little bit scary that they keep poking around Dalvin Cook and Leonard Fournette. And, if they sign one of these guys, that's going to be a concern. But Rhamondre Stevenson is real good. Leonard Fournette was real bad last year. Dalvin Cook, the trajectory on him is clearly pointing downward. So are we worrying about some guy who's just going to come in and be a backup and get lapped by Rhamondre Stevenson? Because Rhamondre Stevenson is freaking good. Yeah. And, you want to talk about another guy he's the most talented player on the New England offense. I'm not even sure that it's close. So I think either way, he's going to be the centerpiece of the offense.
I don't disagree. And one thing to Evan's point, Dwayne, I'm sure you're aware, Rhamondre had a streak of 6 straight games, I believe it was, with 20% or more target share. You don't see that at the running back position. Rhamondre was very good at earning targets last year. Dwayne, what do you think on Rhamondre's outlook for 2023?
Yeah, and that's the big component. And the Patriots don't have any good pass catchers. Like, I don't think we're being over dramatic in saying that. I mean, no one is there that's going to demand a lot of targets. There's a very reasonable chance like Rhamondre is the top target earner on the team. Like, he already showed that he could do it. His targets per route run, 26% last year. That's in the top 3 in the NFL. He's not like at the level of the CMCs and the Camaras as far as like route running downfield, like angle routes against linebackers and stuff. But in an offense like this, without a lot of other options in the passing game, like, you can do a lot with him with screen passes. And he's still a plus route runner. He's just not quite to that next level. So I think he could regress some in that target share department, but it's hard to really want to regress him when you look at the other players on the offense. So I think he's the centerpiece to the offense. I think his ability as a pass catching down back insulates him somewhat. Like, Zeke's basically, that's who you hope they sign, because Zeke's just going to come in, take 30% of the rushing attempts, still a few touchdowns. Well, they're going to try to give that kind of role to somebody that's already on the team, even if they don't sign Zeke. You can't play these guys every down. The one where it gets a little more tricky, I think, is if, you sign Fournette, just because at least coaches have shown they trust him in the passing game in the past, right? Lenny, as much as we see him as this between the tackles grinder, he's like one of the few backs in the NFL that, like, over every year of like his first 6 years of his career, like, had a 20% plus targets per route run. So, like, he's a little better than we think in that realm. Now, to Evan's point, like, took a step back last year. Like, Fournette is not what he once was. But like, Zeke would be the welcome addition. Fournette, a little more scary. But I don't think there's anything here for me, Adam, like, that would push Rhamondre more than like to the end of the 3rd round. So like, if Fournette signed, I would still take Rhamondre at the end of the 3rd. Right now, I'll take Rhamondre at the beginning of the 3rd, right? I'll take him in the middle of the 3rd. If they sign Fournette, I might push him down 6-7 spots, like, overall, not 6 or 7 running backs, 6 or 7 spots overall. So I don't feel like there's that much risk. And the other thing is, like, the Patriots do this every year. They kick the tires on all the veterans, and a lot of times they don't sign any of them. They're basically ready. They're saying Pierre Strong, Kevin Harris, show us something. If not, we've already talked to all these dudes. We're ready to sign one of them, especially if another one gets signed and we know we've got to act quick. We've done our due diligence.
Bill O'Brien in the past has been adamant about using a sub back. In other words, having a strict, clear pass down back. It doesn't mean it can't be Rhamondre, but I'm not sure the Patriots want him to be that. It doesn't mean he can't catch a ton of balls in base, because like Dwayne said, there's not a lot of target competition. So we'll see there. I think I'm a little bit cooler on Rhamondre than you guys from a team perspective and from a sub back perspective, but we will certainly see there. Speaking of pass catching, the knock on Travis Etienne has been that the pass catching we saw at Clemson was a mirage. He's actually not a very good pass catcher. He's not going to earn a lot of targets in the NFL. Jaguars go out of their way to use a 3rd round pick, which, by the way, is pretty high these days, on Tank Bigsby, who I actually like and have been taking a lot of. But man, you can get Etienne in the 4th round now. Coming back from the Liz Frank last year, and I talked to Stefania about this a little bit, he looked explosive coming back from Liz Frank last year as a pure runner. So, Dwayne, what say you on Travis Etienne's role for the Jags this year?
Yeah, I think he was really good on early downs, to your point, and that was coming off of the injury. He was a hyper explosive player. 12% of his carries went for 10 plus yards, right? That's on par for the last 3 years with what an RB1 does, right? RB3 is at 10%. So some of these things, there's small differences, but like, mapping all this to fantasy performance, Etienne definitely has an advantage there. But I do worry a little bit. He was not good inside the 5-yard line. Now, those kind of samples can be tough because you don't get a lot of opportunities like inside the 5 every year. So some of it can just be pure randomness. I happened to watch most of Etienne's snaps though last year, and like, he just looked terrible inside the 5. Like, they actually started just rushing. They just started using Trevor Lawrence. They would bring in Jermichael Hasty sometimes, who's not really a goal line back. So the biggest concern I have for Etienne, to your point, he did not play well in the passing game. And honestly, shout out to Jay Moyer on Twitter, Jay Moyer FB. He said this about Etienne last year. He said, Dwayne, you're wrong. He's like, I know what all the data says about him in college. Travis Etienne is not a good pass catching back. He was like, it was all scheme stuff at Clemson. He's not anything like these other pass catchers. And I was like, yeah, whatever, Jay, I'll just trust the data. Well, Jay, the film wins. Film wins on that one. Travis Etienne sucked as a receiver. But what I worry about with Tank Bigsby is, could he steal those carries inside the 5?
Yes.
Like, then suddenly you're Travis Etienne between the 20s. It's kind of, you could get a Miles Sanders 2 years ago season. Now you could also get a Miles Sanders last year season, because Sanders did not get a lot of carries last year inside the 5. We know Jalen Hurts got those, and he still popped off. In that scenario, you're just banking on the Jaguars being a really good offense. But I think he's a fine pick in round 4. I don't take him a ton, especially in PPR. I like him a little more in half PPR. But I think the cat's out of the bag on the receiving ability, and I do worry about some of the touches inside the 5, because Bigsby's actually kind of built to do that.
Yeah, I take a ton of Bigsby late. I've been taking more Kenneth Walker than Etienne in that 4-5 range there. Evan, any Etienne thoughts before we move on?
I just generally agree with like everything that you guys have said. When I just did the Jaguars team preview, and that's all that stuff kind of really stood out to me. Like Travis Etienne actually saw a good number of scoring position carries, but just straight up did not execute. Tank Bigsby caught a ton of passes at Auburn. And I know some scouts, and man, they love Tank Bigsby. Like they think he's a baller. He's 6'2", 213. He scored a ton of he had 20 touchdowns over the last 2 seasons. I think he's a real threat, and I'm all in on Kenneth Walker over Travis Etienne straight up. And I'm with you. I really haven't gotten almost any Travis Etienne in my personal drafts.
Okay. Najee Harris is always a tough one, because we talk about opportunity at the top, and Najee Harris certainly gets and projects to get a ton of it. Now, there's certainly a contingent out there that says Najee Harris isn't that good. This is his 3rd year. Maybe the Steelers finally give up on him, and not give up on him, but make it more of a timeshare with Jaylen Warren. I kind of think the Steelers don't care, and they're like, we took Najee in the 1st round. He's our guy. Jaylen Warren's good, but it doesn't really matter. Dwayne, what do you think about Najee's usage profile for this year?
I think the take you just had is really sharp. We all like Jaylen Warren, but like this is a pretty classic leak, right? We fantasy nerds, spreadsheets, we get, well, at least me, I think your team knows sex, Adam, but we get excited right around this backup that doesn't have to come in and do everything. And I like Jaylen Warren. Everything looks great, right? The explosive rushing attempts, his ability as a pass catcher, all really good. But we've seen this in the past. If a team has that 1st round capital sunk into the starter, it's going to be really hard for Jaylen Warren, in my opinion, to carve out too much from Harris. I think he could hurt him a little bit because Jaylen Warren was really good. But there's also a chance that Jaylen Warren's just not as good as we think, because we see this a lot with these guys on these small sample sizes. We give them a little bit more work, and it's like, ugh. Like Chase Edmonds last year. Like we had seen some flashes on the small sample. Give him a little more work. It's like, oh my God, like get this guy out of my fantasy lineup. What's happening? But with Najee, I think both sides are right. And I think that's why you're seeing his ADP where it's at. Najee is not good. Like he's not an efficient running back. Average yards after contact, and he's a big dude, 2.7. Like that's not even RB3 worthy, right? That's not even top 36 worthy over the last 3 years. Explosive rush rate, 7% of his carries go for 10 plus yards. The average for an RB3 is 10%. Like RB1s are 12%. Najee's not even sniffing like that level of efficiency and talent. Now targets, decent. Like he's an RB2 range guy, 18% targets per route run. Now he doesn't do a lot with them. Yards per route run, 0.77. Like an RB3 gets you 0.97. So I think both sides of the argument are right. Najee does not stack up against the other players going in that same range of the draft. When you think about elite upside, everything works out and they have a boom efficiency year, probably not happening. But on the other side of that, like it's hard to imagine a scenario where he doesn't get at least 60% of the work, right? So I think the question becomes like, can you get something like Najee Harris later in your fantasy drafts? And I don't have much Najee because I do think I can do that. Now I'm going to give up some certainty, right? In a player like Najee that I'm pretty sure is going to be locked into a significant kind of role. But because he doesn't have much upside for me in the efficiency department, like I'm much more likely to wait, right? And take some stabs at the round 7, round 8 type backs that I think could be in a similar workload range. Again, not as certain about them, but I don't see the upside ceiling case for Najee. I think if you're taking him in round 4, there's a really good chance he pays off ADP, right? He's probably going to score enough points to pay that off. Is he going to win your league for you? I don't think so. Is he going to lose your league for you? Also, probably don't think so. He's probably like, it's going to be a fine round 4 pick. I just don't take him much.
Sounds like you're not in on Etienne or Najee. I'm just curious if you had to take one of those guys, who you prefer between Etienne and Najee.
I'm taking Najee if I had to pick between the two. Okay. I'm really worried about Etienne. Does have more upside like overall, but I'm pretty certain he sucks as a receiver. Like it would shock me if he suddenly became better at that. And they also have so many other mouths to feed in the passing game. Like they don't even need to force that. They don't even need to throw the ball to Etienne. They've got 4 other pass catchers. So I like Najee from that perspective.
Okay. Let's go to Joe Mixon. So Joe Mixon had quite the roller coaster of an offseason. There were rumors he was going to get cut. Ends up taking a massive, massive pay cut in order to stay with the team. Let's ignore the suspension risk for now, which remains up in the air. I'm not sure. At this point, I'm doubtful it's going to happen, but we're not going to talk about that here. I'm curious, though, on Joe Mixon's actual role, because last year we saw Samaje Perine play a ton of pass downs and actually outplay Joe Mixon a ton. They let Samaje Perine walk in free agency and don't really replace him, right? I mean, I understand they drafted Chase Brown, but they didn't really replace him. So at least in theory, Dwayne, Joe Mixon's role could be better this year. And I get he sucked last year from an efficiency perspective, but he could actually get a better role this year when he's going later in drafts. If you follow what I'm saying, what do you think about Joe Mixon?
Yeah, Joe Mixon is Najee Harris, but you get to take him later and he plays on a way better offense. That's the way I look at Mixon. Yes, you are taking some risk on, like, could the suspension thing happen? You already mentioned, I'm not going to repeat it all. He was terrible from an efficiency standpoint. Like, if you just cared about efficiency, you would never, ever draft Joe Mixon. Like, it looks like clearly the better days are behind him as a rusher. But what you mentioned, like early on in the season, before he had the concussion, really his role was different. Like once he had the concussion, that's when Perine carved out that role. So we kind of got to see what he looks like in that role already. So for example, like weeks 1 to 8, like he averaged 57% route participation, like 65% is elite. That means he's in a route 57% of the time Joe Burrow dropped back to pass over those games. That's a really good number for a running back. And the thing that Mixon did better last year, where he took a step forward, it was actually his best year ever as a target earner, right? He had a 12% target share. He had games early in the season. He had a 16%er, an 18%er, a 25%er. And then I was like, well, okay, Ja'Marr Chase missed some time. We know T. Higgins was in and out of the lineup. So I just went in and I looked, hey, just show me when these guys were all on the field together, Joe Mixon, T. Higgins, and then, Ja'Marr Chase. Joe Mixon out-targeted T. Higgins for some reason. I'm not saying that's happening again. Like we all know T. Higgins is a good player, so don't take this wrong. But the point being, they really did a better job of integrating him into the passing game last year, and that came away from Tyler Boyd. It came away from the tight end. So I like that with Mixon. It could also just be a blip. But like if you're getting to play in a pass-first offense, you get more targets. That can offset some of that efficiency for you. And man, I just feel like easily Mixon could roll out of bed and suck and score 15 rushing touchdowns. Like you could do that in this offense because they could be the number 1 offense in the league. So sure. I like those things.
Mixon was, the Bengals were second in pass rate over expectation last year. And I just think Joe Burrow is a very good thrower of the football to the running back position. Evan, any Joe Mixon takes on role? I know you've been higher than market on him. I mean, it was ridiculous when the start of this process, he was going like the 8th round. Now he goes more in the 4th, 5th round. I've seen mostly.
Yeah, I think he's a very bankable volume back in one of the best offenses in the league. And this is another one of these backfields where it's like, Travion Williams has been around for several years and never earned touches. And now all of a sudden he's like the locked in number 2 back here.
Yeah.
Maybe Chase Brown will be something. He's got kind of an interesting profile. He's very productive at Illinois. And he ran much faster at the combine than anybody thought he would. I think he ran like 4.41. So maybe he'll be something, but this is just another backfield where it's like Joe Mixon is locked in. The Bengals are going to score a ton of points. I know that this Joe Burrow thing is a little bit concerning, but I have not moved him down my rankings yet. I've been drafting Joe Mixon.
Yeah. Okay. I don't want to spend a ton of time on this one. I just want to see if you agree with the consensus on the Seattle backfield, Dwayne, because let's ignore the injury stuff for now. I think both Kenneth Walker with the groin, Zach Charbonnet with the shoulder are going to be okay for week 1. Assuming that's the case, the assumption I think from the market is Kenneth Walker will be the early down back. Kenneth Walker will get a majority of the base carries. Kenneth Walker is an extremely explosive boom bust type runner who's going to have a lot of negative runs, but some massive 60-yard touchdown runs, etc. Zach Charbonnet, meanwhile, was drafted to play a different kind of role, a more consistent runner and a pass catching role. That is the market, I think, assumption right now. Do you agree with that on the Seattle backfield split this season?
Yeah, I think based on their skill sets, that's the right first take. I will say, like, if both are healthy, it wouldn't surprise me though if suddenly we got to week 5, we're like, wow, this is really almost a split backfield, right? And Zach Charbonnet is getting more of the base work than we thought he would get. Walker is clearly the more explosive player. However, like in our rookie model, they graded out really close to each other. Like they were both guys that look like, 60% of the time, right? They can give you an RB1 season by year 3. So like they had some similar traits overall from their body of work in college, even though stylistically they're very different. I do think Charbonnet offers a more complete skill set, kind of to where you were alluding to, Adam. Like he's a more well-rounded player. Last year, they tried to get Walker involved a little bit more in the passing game because they dealt with some injuries to the passing down backs. He wasn't able to do a lot with it. Targets per route run still stayed at 14%. Even in those games where he was getting on the field more, he wasn't earning many targets. So I do think that's the right assumption. Charbonnet takes over pass down work. The question is, does he steal some of the carries inside the 5 because of what you mentioned? Walker's very explosive. Like, I don't know that anyone in the league has a better jump cut than Kenneth Walker. And there's some good running backs in the league. His might be number 1. Like he can jump his jump cut like is further than I can probably broad jump, just like side to side. It's quite amazing to watch it and watch the defender react to it. And he can plant and meet and be gone. Like that's the other part. He makes the jump cut and lands and is suddenly going 100 miles an hour, like all in like just a split second. So like his talent is definitely there, but you do wonder, like down inside the 5 where you don't want people doing that and giving up ground. Would they rather have someone like Charbonnet just keep it in between the tackles, do what they want, and just, poke your head across the goal line, get the touchdown. So I think there's also a chance Charbonnet carves out some of that. Charbonnet actually is my most drafted running back of all running backs over 160 drafts right now that I'm in best ball. I had 24% exposure. He's falling now, like the last 2 nights that I've drafted because of the injury news. But I just felt like he's a player with a lot of outs. I do like Kenneth Walker. I like the talent profile, but I definitely have more Charbonnet, and mostly just because I can get him 5 rounds later.
One thing, Evan, and I know both of us have been in on Kenneth Walker. Both of us have been in on Charbonnet. I don't actually mind taking both. I think one thing is I want exposure to Seattle's offense, and the wide receivers are so expensive. I mean, I love DK Metcalf. He's expensive, man. Same with Lockett now. I've seen Lockett start to go in the 50s a bunch. Same with JSN. And so you get into a spot where like, hey, I want some Seattle exposure. I need a running back. Zach Charbonnet in round 10, 11 makes a lot of sense. I also take Kenneth Walker some there too. Evan, any thoughts on the Charbonnet Walker split this season?
Yeah, I just did the Seahawks team preview, and the explosiveness of Kenneth Walker really stood out. That, as Dwain mentioned, he was 11th among NFL running backs in rushing attempts. He was 3rd in runs of 15 plus yards. He's a lot better athlete than Zach Charbonnet, and Charbonnet is good. I mean, he averaged 7 yards a carry in his final season at UCLA, caught 37 passes. So he could be a problem in the passing game. I just think that the Seahawks are going to be in a lot of positive game script. I took the over on their win total at 9.5. And I think that that's really going to benefit Kenneth Walker. And this dude getting a bunch of carries, he's going to bang long runs and he's going to score touchdowns. And I really liked when we did the offensive line show with Brandon Thorne, how he's big on the Seahawks offensive line. I think Kenneth Walker is going to kick ass this year.
Okay. Let's get to one that's controversial that I didn't think would be controversial. Alexander Mattison. I mean, the spreadsheet socialists absolutely hate Alexander Mattison with a passion. I thought it was a foregone conclusion. Like you can say, like maybe Alexander Madison's not good. Fine. I thought it was a foregone conclusion that Alexander Mattison was going to be the starter, be the man, play 60, 70% of snaps at a minimum for this Vikings team. Apparently that's a hot take, because if you say that, people are like, oh Dwain McBride, Ty Chandler, they're gonna Alexander Mattison sucks. I don't know where this is coming from, honestly, Dwain. And people are like, well, he's not a 1-for-1 replacement to Dalvin Cook. Dalvin Cook was going in round 1 and round 2. Alexander Mattison now goes in round 5. You're not asking him to be a 1-to-1 replacement. So I'm getting all hot and bothered here, Dwain. Can you talk to me about where all this Alexander Mattison FUD is usually, and if you want to say he's not good, that's fine. I'm not going to argue with you about that. What I do want to argue with people about, though, is that the idea that he's going to get his role taken by Ty Chandler and Dwain McBride. So I don't know. Is that a crazy take, Dwayne? What do you think about Alexander Mattison's role?
I don't think that's a crazy take. I've actually been kind of surprised by it, even because like I kind of broke down the process I'm going through and I'm looking at all these things. And Alexander Mattison, like underlying rushing profile last year. Now, again, a guy on a smaller sample wasn't having to carry the lead role, right? Like a Dalvin Cook. But missed tackles forced per attempt, 31%. Already told you the league average is 17. Yards after contact, he was slightly below the league average at 2.8. It's 2.94 is the league average. 12% of his carries went for 10 plus yards. Like the average RB1, right, is right in that range. So I don't feel like he's as bad of a running back. And it's not just last year. Like we can look at these data points over time with him. I feel like he's kind of getting an unfair shake by all the spreadsheet people, which I'm one of. So I don't think he's like a super talented player, but I think he's decent. And I think, to your point, where you're getting him in drafts, and if you think about the fact that the depth chart behind him, and back to Evan's point earlier about looking at some of these depth charts, I know that the dead zone, right, is really about you just find someone that you're like, how can they not get the volume? Because we look at the depth chart and it sucks. And so I think that's the other thing that people are latching onto. And they're like, well, in the past, the dead zone has been this bad place because we're doing this. And technically that's right. But to Evan's point, like, I don't know that I've seen weaker backfields. Like these are super, super weak backfields where I just don't see why we're questioning. And the money they gave Mattison, like they're going to let him do his thing. I would be blown away if Mattison does not get 65% of the workload in Minnesota. And guess what? Great. He doesn't hit that and he gets 55%. He's still probably paying off his ADP right now, like assuming like the guy's healthy, and an offense that we like, by the way. This could be a top 6 offense in the league. So I'm not like overexposure on Alexander Mattison. I'm like just slightly below the field, but I'm definitely open. Like I've started 0 and taken Alexander Mattison as my first running back,
right?
And felt fine about it, like to be honest. And then I tack on some other guys with that. So yeah, I'm actually going to come to the defense of like looking at the depth chart, like in this situation, and looking at Alexander Mattison's profile. And I do think the market is slightly overreacting. And I think some of it, honestly, is just blanket statement kind of stuff. Guys, historically, like this has just been bad. I don't see it for Mattison as being bad.
I take Walker over Mattison, but I don't like feel great about it. Like I would be open to switching that and taking some Mattison over Walker. Evan, what do you think about that one? Kenneth Walker versus Alexander Mattison.
I have Mattison one spot ahead of Walker. I liked how Dwayne could not bring himself to say spreadsheet socialist. He just said spreadsheet people.
Spreadsheet. So I should have said it. I'm sorry. I missed my spot. I hope you guys will still welcome me back. I did. I missed it.
Do you want to say it? I mean, it feels good.
Yes. Spreadsheet socialist. Yes.
All right, good. Yeah, it feels good to say that. What a lot of people point to with Alexander Mattison too is that his yards per carry have been low. And look, he's like the anti Kenneth Walker. He's not going to hit explosive runs, but the team likes him in pass protection. They like him as a receiver. He's a grinder, but he's going to get a ton of work on all 3 downs in a top 10 offense. I mean, he's got a chance to score a lot of touchdowns, and touchdowns really move the needle in fantasy football. He's built to execute at the goal line. He's 221 pounds. I just think that people are kind of overthinking it almost a little bit.
And like Evan, I would argue with people that say he's not explosive, right?
Oh,
I mean, 12% of his carries went for 10 plus yards last year.
Okay.
That's RB1 worthy. The league average is 9.5%. The year before he was at 7%, but the year before that, 13%, the year before that, 15%. So 3 out of 5 years, he's actually been at an RB1 level of creating explosive plays. Is he the fastest guy? No, but that's not the only way you create those plays, right? So yeah, I think that like the Hive is kind of like overly suppressing Mattison, saying that he's just a guy. And I think, well, overall, I agree with that with his profile, but I think that's a bit harsh. I think he's actually, to this point, proven he can create long plays.
All right, let's go to a guy that I've been paralyzed on. I know some sharp people like him. I can't get it out of my head that Cam Akers was like almost out of the NFL before the end of last season, and he started just absolutely tearing it up. Now, if you listen to the Stefania Bell podcast, which came out on Tuesday, we talked a bunch about this. And yeah, I mean, 18 to 24 months off of an Achilles now is possible. And Cam Akers is an example of that. His ADP has been creeping up. Does not have a lot of competition there, does Cam Akers. We saw last year he can take on big workloads as he did down the stretch. Dwayne, what do you think about Cam Akers' outlook in 2023?
Now, Cam Akers does scare me to death. I will say that I went on a pod with Matt Waldman 3 weeks ago or so, and he talked about everything he broke down with Akers from a film perspective and got me second guessing myself a little bit, because Matt's like way better at watching film than I am. So I try to listen to all the potential inputs, right, you can have into a process. But overall, the data perspective is just not good. All the things that people are throwing at Alexander Mattison are all actually true about Cam Akers, right? Like missed tackles forced per attempt, average to below average, yards after contact, below average, explosive rush rate, 9%. That's below league average. It's not even RB3 worthy. Not a big target earner either. Now, he did do a little bit last year down the stretch. Once they lost Cooper Kupp, they incorporated him more into that passing game, but I don't think that necessarily holds in games without Kupp. The other thing that just scares me, it's McVay and Akers, it's like Ross and Rachel from Friends. It's on again, it's off again. I never know where I stand with it. And oh, by the way, they haven't needed some superstar backing him up to take over his job. They literally have shown they'll give it to anybody if they're not feeling it with Cam Akers. Now, the positive for Akers is we've also seen when McVay's feeling hot and heavy about something, we've seen him ride one back multiple times now over the last 3 years. It's been Akers. It's been Darrell Henderson. I mean, we've seen him do it with Sony Michel, for crying out loud. Got a stint where we're like, well, shit, guess we're starting Sony Michel because he's going to get 80% of the work. So I do think what will happen is Cam Akers will probably start the year and people are going to be like, oh my God, I should have drafted him. What I can't tell you about Cam Akers is what's going to happen by week 8. Yeah. Will it be, something where they pivot right now? Michel obviously is now out of the picture. Who'd they bring in this week? It was nobody. It was nobody good. They signed somebody. But anyway, it was Royce Freeman. That's not moving the needle for anybody. Again, back to Evan's point. Look at these freaking depth charts. Now, I do like Zach Evans. He was a really good prospect coming out of high school. He was a 5-star guy, went to TCU. Then he ends up transferring to Ole Miss. Doesn't have great vision, but he has the thing Cam Akers doesn't have. And that is this dude can freaking hit home runs. He can hit the edge. So, but again, he's a late round pick, man. It's not like the Rams spent a second round pick on this guy.
I think the Rams actually like Kieran Williams as well. He profiles better as a pass catcher, but I think the organization actually still likes Kieran Williams, and we'll see if he can get into the mix. But yeah, I mean, so much of the Cam Akers stuff is difficult and up in the air. I've been paralyzed and not taking.
What are you guys doing with him? Evan, are you taking him?
I've just been passing mostly.
I've been mostly passing. Every once in a while, I'll take him. I mean, they fed him hard late last season, and he kind of delivered. It still scares me though, the Achilles thing.
Sure.
Because we still haven't seen a running back come back from that injury and put together a full quality season. I don't think that's ever happened in NFL history.
Yeah.
At least not in recent NFL history. But
Akers was nuts down the stretch.
He was.
He was getting 69% of the team's rushing attempts from week 13 on. If you just look at the last 4 weeks, that was 73%. You don't see that often. They did feed him.
Ridiculous. Okay. One that I've been warming up to is Dameon Pierce. And it's what if CJ Stroud is actually a big time quarterback upgrade? What if this offensive line, which we spent a lot of time talking with Brandon Thorne about, is actually really good? He has them 13th, but I think they have potential to be even better than 13th does the Texans offensive line. And then we saw Dameon Pierce last year. Dude can really play. Now it fell apart down the stretch from a team level. And obviously that's a huge risk again. And it's why I haven't been taking a ton of Dameon Pierce, just so much systemic risk in the Texans just being god awful again. But he is set up reasonably. They did add Devin Singletary, which I think is a underrated addition. Coaches are going to, I think, giving the ball to Devin Singletary, at least in a change-up role. So maybe not the extreme workloads we saw last year from Dameon Pierce. But again, he's another running back that is available very late. Dwayne, what do you think about Dameon Pierce?
Yeah, I like Pierce over Cam Akers. I think he flashed more from a talent perspective. Who's going to get more work this year? Like, flip a coin, honestly. Like, I think it's really tough sometimes to project these things. But with Pierce, like, they did show from a rushing perspective, they were willing to trust him in all areas. Short down and distance, inside the 5. He had the base down stuff. And he came through with an RB1 worthy performance when we look at his rushing profile. He was number 1 in missed tackles forced per attempt, 28%. The league average is 17. He was number 9 in yards after contact, 3.3 yards. And then he was the number 9 graded PFF runner overall at 84.8. So the talent looks like it's there. The receiving profile is where I was kind of hoping for more. It wasn't terrible. But they didn't trust him, right? They didn't trust him in the 2-minute offense. They had a couple of games where they looked like they were going to go to him, and then they went back away. Now, we have a new coaching staff, and what I will say about Dameon Pierce, even though he never took over a full-time role in Florida, which kind of seems to be a theme, like they have a lot of guys that play just a little bit, and then they end up being decent, NFL players or draft picks.
Well,
but
that's
with
why
Pierce,
their coach got fired, because he didn't know the good players to play.
He didn't know to actually play Kyle Pitts. Yeah. Yeah. Dameon Pierce, he was pretty good as a receiver out of the backfield in college. And he had an RB2 worthy performance. Like, if you look at his targets per route run, 19% last year. So the thing with Devin Singletary is he was not good as a receiver in Buffalo. To your point, Adam, I do think he's a bit underrated. In fact, like, when I first wrote up the free agents this year, I was like, you're not going to believe this, but like, Devin Singletary is probably a little underrated. As much as everybody hates him, wants to pile onto him, like, he has some things to like, but it's mostly on early downs. He's not been someone that's been consistent as a receiver. He's not been someone that's been consistent as a blocker. And so if Pierce takes over that role, that would be huge for us, Adam, because that gives us the insulation against the crappy environment. You don't want an early down back on a bottom 5 offense. That sucks, because you don't get a chance to score a lot of touchdowns. But if you take over the passing down role, well, then it turns into, well, I guess we're going to run the 2-minute offense for the whole second half. And then Dameon Pierce can catch 6-7 balls. So if I had to put money down today, I'm betting Dameon Pierce wins the passing down role. I've had a lot of people argue with me about that on Twitter, and I could be wrong. But Devin Singletary, if there's one thing he's been terrible at, period, it's in the receiving game. It's in the receiving game. So I think Pierce, if he takes that step forward, suddenly we could be like, wow, we were too worried about Singletary. I'm actually scared of passing Dameon Pierce and not having exposure. I don't lose sleep at night about not drafting Cam Akers. So that's the best way I can put it.
I think the pushback I'd have on the pass down take is that they signed Devin Singletary to play a role. If he's not going to play on pass downs, like, where's he going to play? Like, how are they going to get Dameon Pierce breaks? You know what I mean? How are they going to get him off the field? I feel like sometimes they just be like, oh, well, let's put the backup in here on this 3rd and 8 or whatever.
I think the other way you can do that, right, is you just every 3rd or 4th series. We do have backfields that are like that it's not one person passed down and one person, handling early downs. We do have backfields where it's literally, no, we're going to let you rest every 4th drive. We let you rest probably every 3rd drive might be more realistic, given that they did pay Devin Singletary, to your point. So I think there's no way Pierce just isn't coming off the field. I think he will, but I think there are more paths than just saying, well, this guy's the passing down back, this guy's the early down back.
Yep, totally fair. Okay. Detroit is an interesting one. I've taken both of these guys a ton. I take Jahmyr Gibbs a ton in the 3rd round. David Montgomery might be my most clicked running back because he's always there in the 8th round. I always seem to need running back. Obviously, the outlier number of 1-yard touchdowns that Jamal Williams had cannot be replicated by any stretch whatsoever, but there's still a pretty good touchdown profile, I think, for David Montgomery there. And obviously Jahmyr Gibbs has one of the best pass catching draft capital profiles we've seen coming out of college. Dwayne, go ahead on how you see it between Jahmyr Gibbs versus David Montgomery usage.
So I'm with you. I like drafting both. I'm willing to draft Jahmyr Gibbs at the end of the 3rd in a PPR. I'm willing to take him in the early to mid 4th and a half PPR. David Montgomery in round 7, I really don't care the format. I'll just click him. I'll click him in round 7. Honestly, I feel way better about drafting David Montgomery, even though I have Jahmyr Gibbs in the picture, than taking Cam Akers in round 6, or round 5. But with Gibbs, you kind of teased it there. This profile, this is no joke. This isn't hyperbole. This isn't oh my God, let's get some clicks on an article. Like the data really does say this. Like his targets per route run, his comps in college are Christian McCaffrey and Alvin Kamara.
Mm-hmm.
Like we're not making it up, right? His ability, right, to get into routes and to be for the coaches to want to deploy him that way are also, it shows to be really strong. It's funny. Some people will look at it and be like, well, he was out there for like a 50% route participation over his career. I'm like, well, McCaffrey wasn't like at 80% either. He was at like 45 or 50% in college. Like he stacks up next to these guys in every single way. Hyper explosive player. He's going to get to play inside. He's going to play on turf. We've got a quarterback that we know will throw the ball to him. There's a lot of outs for Jahmyr Gibbs to still pay off in round 4. Even if David Montgomery gets 60% of the rushing workload, which I think is that could happen, right? It could be Jahmyr Gibbs only getting like 35, 40% of the rushing workload and Montgomery getting the rest. But I think because of his explosive playability, and like the best example I can give you is remember Alvin Kamara's rookie year, whenever he was going in like round 10 of fantasy drafts, round 11, by the time he reached hype peak. And it was because there was Adrian Peterson, right? There was Mark Ingram. So Peterson ends up like getting weeded out of the picture, and Ingram got like 65% of the rush. Like, I don't even think Alvin Kamara didn't even get to 30% of the rushing workload that year. And he finished as the RB3 overall. Like that's how good Jahmyr Gibbs is. If you want to say, take McCaffrey's rookie season, that was RB9 overall, right? You're getting him in the 4th round. Like, so, and remember, like what if something happens to David Montgomery? What if Jahmyr Gibbs is so freaking good that David Montgomery just gets less playing time? There's a wide range of outcomes. And I just feel like if you do hit, even on the low end, he pays off his ADP, but there's certain scenarios nobody wants to talk about. Like he could get more snaps than Montgomery. Do we think that's likely? No, but he could. And if he did, if he suddenly became the 60% guy, where would you rank him? If you knew right now Jahmyr Gibbs was going to get 65% of the Lions offense, like he'd be in the top 6.
Well,
so
listen, you're talking to a guy who took DeAndre Swift at like 12 and 13 overall last season. Okay. So, Jahmyr Gibbs, I'm in there. I'm in there for sure. Okay. Let's run through these last 3 quickly here. Some guys that are going a bit later with more uncertain roles. First one I want to talk about is James Cook. Obviously, Dameon Harris and Latavius Murray are battling to be the big back. The question is, how much will they play versus James Cook? And they used a bunch of draft capital on James Cook. They've been wanting a James Cook type running back for a while. I feel like they want to let him loose if he's good enough to do it. Dwayne, what do you think about James Cook's utilization profile?
Yeah, loved it. From a standpoint of what he was able to do. He did not get the role we hoped last year. He was only on the field for 21% of Josh Allen's dropbacks. That's not good. But when he was out there, he did what we would have expected based on his collegiate profile. And that was 3 things. Targets per route run, 26%. That's elite. He was earning targets from a scrambling quarterback, guys. It can happen. And you know how it happens? Is you have a guy that can work down the field. Mm-hmm. If a scrambling quarterback looks to his right and he sees that he could check the ball down to you or just take off for 15 or 20, like he's just going to take off. But if you're in the progression of his read and he's looking downfield and he sees you, he can throw you the ball. And so James Cook checks another box that's super important, like for stickiness of targets year over year. And that was his 2.3 ADOT. So they incorporate him into pass plays down the field. And that was also consistent with what we saw from him in college. You put those 2 things together, you get a 1.43 yards per route run. That's not quite Kamara level, but that's like just below that, right? So really, really good profile as far as when he was on the field. The big question is like, how much will they unleash him? Well, you don't have to worry about Nyheim Hines now. Not that we were super worried about it. The Hines has shown that he can be a pretty good receiver, but even on the ground, he was good. 21% missed tackles force, explosive rush rate, 13%. I think there's a chance James Cook gets almost half the rushing attempts plus all this receiving work. That's like his upside case. That's what you're hoping for. I think at a minimum, he gets like 25, 30% of the carries at him, and he gets all the passing down work. Like, I think that's going to happen, and I think that makes him a really good pick where he goes.
I remember you were big on him last year, and I feel like you're just going to end up being a year early on him, potentially. And I think that the Nyheim Hines thing does kind of matter for James Cook, because that was like a legitimate threat to what James Cook does best, and that's catch the ball out of the backfield. He's a tough guy for me to figure though. I'm actually working on the Bills team preview right now, and I'm just like kind of all over the place on him. I've been drafting him a little bit, but they're, especially after kind of what happened last season, and Josh Allen at the goal line, and Dameon Harris, I think, can run the rock.
Yeah.
You can. He's kind of easy to talk your way out of him, but I also think that it's kind of easy to talk your way in on him. So I'm just kind of all over the place on him.
This is the archetype of the back that I like to take. Guys who go in round 9, 10, 11, who have some base work, and then we expect them to get all the pass down work. So that, to me, that's like James Cook, Antonio Gibson, Devon A-Chain, maybe. Guys like that, Charbonnet, like guys who are going to get a little bit of base work and then the passing work in these kind of later rounds. I like to take. Evan, I wanted to go back to you for this next guy because I'm curious who you like between James Cook and Isiah Pacheco. Isiah Pacheco has been a guy who has not been a big part of the pass game. And also the Chiefs are just so throw heavy in the red zone that it makes it hard. But Pacheco's clearly, I think, initiated himself as the lead back here. What do you think about Pacheco's role and Pacheco versus James Cook, Evan?
I have Pacheco ahead of him. Just so much touchdown upside for Isiah Pacheco, and there's no question. Like, Jerick McKinnon is back. He played like a lot of snaps last year. I think it was over 50% of the Chiefs' offensive snaps. He played really, really well. They trust him as like as a pass protector. He's always been a pretty good receiver. So that's a real thing. I actually think that Clyde Edwards-Helaire might not make the 53. We'll see about that.
Yeah,
it might come down to him and Deneric Prince potentially. But Isiah Pacheco, man, he's a fun dude to watch too. That dude runs real hard, and I think that he has a pretty locked in role. And he was playing hurt last year. He had to undergo 2 off-season surgeries.
Yeah, shoulder and hand, not his lower body, but shoulder and hand for Pacheco surgeries.
Yeah. So I have him ahead of James Cook, but again, I'm very intrigued by James Cook.
Yeah, I have Pacheco ahead too. I think the concerns about McKinnon and how throw heavy they are in the red zone are a big concern to me. But honestly, Dwayne, credit to the Chiefs, man. They used a first-round pick on CEH. After 2 years, they were like, this isn't it, and let's just move on. And, that's like, I know Ben Gretsch talked about this, but that's the hope for Jaylen Warren, is that the Steelers figure that out, and they're like, oh, well, Najee's not that good. It's year 3, whatever. I don't think that's going to happen in Pittsburgh, but it did happen in Kansas City. Anyways, I digress, Dwayne. What are your thoughts on Pacheco role?
Yeah, I have Pacheco ahead of James Cook for a lot of the same reasons that you guys talked about. He does run really hard between the tackles, and who knows? McKinnon is older. Could Pacheco? What if we did look up in week 4? We're like, crap, they're letting him have receiving down work. I think one of the things we do sometimes is with these guys too early in their career, right? We pigeonhole them into something. Now, Pacheco was not this great receiving back in college either. So he's kind of got 2 marks against him right now, but where he's going in drafts, I think he's fairly, he was overpriced early on. I was just never getting him. I was like, man, I'm not taking a super late round running back, NFL draft wise, and taking him in round 5 and 6 of fantasy drafts. But now that he's gotten to where he is, yeah, I'm fine getting him. And one of these seasons it's going to surprise everybody. We're going to have a Chiefs running back score 12 touchdowns, even though they pass the ball all the time, because they're down there a lot. It could still easily happen.
All right. Last one I want to talk about is the Washington situation, Brian Robinson versus Antonio Gibson. I started the offseason being like, oh, it's clearly Antonio Gibson. Antonio Gibson is the one I want. I have recently flipped on the thought in my head that Eric Bieniemy may actually not be some crazy prolific throwing coordinator like he was, like Andy Reid was in Kansas City. It's easy to do that when you have Patrick Mahomes. When you have Sam Howell and you want to protect your job like Ron Rivera needs to, I think I can see them turning around and giving it to Brian Robinson way more times than anyone wants and using Antonio Gibson in a very specific J.D. McKissic role. That J.D. McKissic role only yielded about 4 carries per game over the last few years. Now, it did yield a bunch of targets. They got into a ton of 2-minute and 4-minute, and it was always J.D. McKissic out there. I think it'll always be Antonio Gibson out there. But in terms of base work, it's hard for me, I think, to give Antonio Gibson more than 4 or 5, 6 carries per game. And that's led me to more Brian Robinson over Gibson lately. Dwain, what do you think about Gibson versus B-Rob?
Well, one, like the way the ADPs have flipped now, it makes it easier to click on Robinson. Like he's one of the easiest guys to click on. And like around 10, you're kind of like, why is he still here? Like, okay, I guess I'll just take him, especially if I'm like, on a build where I didn't take a lot of backs early. But yeah, I've really been on the same page as where you are. Historically, like, and I've studied coordinators a ton, as much as we may like them, and there are some exceptions that really matter. But for the most part, the quarterback is the driver to everything. If you don't have the quarterback to run an innovative scheme, well, guess what? You can't run an innovative scheme. If you don't have a quarterback, it's hard to run a fast offense. If you don't have a really good quarterback, right, it's hard to run a pass-heavy offense. And those things all kind of are connected and interrelated. And we have huge questions in Washington. The other thing that could hurt Antonio Gibson is, what if Sam Howell runs as much as he did, right, at UNC? Like that could take away. So I draft both of these guys, but it's gotten to the point now where Antonio Gibson goes so much further. Like I wrote an article on Antonio Gibson like 6 weeks ago, like saying, this isn't the year to now give up. But now the ADP has pushed him so high. Well, it's kind of like, I'm like, I don't want to be taking Antonio. I'll take him a little more in PPR. Yeah. Half PPR. I'm not getting him that much. Honestly, lately over on Underdog, I would rather really be taking a lot of them.
Where's his ADP at right now?
So right now on Underdog, Gibson is 99 and Brian Robinson is 110. So it's like a 1 round difference between Gibson goes 1 round ahead, and that's half PPR. And I just disagree with that right now. I think in half PPR it's Brian Robinson for me over Antonio Gibson.
And they're still close. Like that McKissick role, like has over the years been really good, right? The question, but the other thing is, like now you also have Jahan Dotson, who's going to demand targets to go with Terry McLaurin. You have Curtis Samuel working underneath all the time, same place. Like back in the day when McKissick was going nuts, they didn't have all those guys.
Yeah,
they just had McLaurin. So that's the other challenge. I really do like Antonio Gibson. I like the profile. He fits the profile you talked about earlier, Adam. Like pass catching back, not going to have as much of the base downs. If things break his way, something happened with Brian Robinson, he can be an every down back, right?
Yes.
That's so he still has paths to really pay off even at ADP, but I've chilled out a little bit with how much he's moved up. Like when we started drafting, we were getting round 12, probably around 11, we were getting Antonio Gibson.
I mean, JD McKissick did not have contingent value to what Dwayne's alluding to. If Brian Robinson got hurt and it was McKissick's not going to carry the ball 20 times. Antonio Gibson might be able to in a pinch. All right. This was awesome. I know we went a little long, but I wanted to make sure we got all the takes out there on the running backs because it is such an important thing. Dwayne, tell the people where they can find you and your work, assuming you want to be found.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you can find me over at fantasylife.com. We've got a pretty cool team going. You guys know some of these guys. We've got Ian Harditz over there. We've got Matthew Friedman. We've got Matt McEwen, Kendall Valenzuela, kind of funny guy. Pete Overzet, he can be funny time to time. So yeah, super excited. You guys can get the newsletter for free. You get it every morning in your inbox, get all the stuff you need. First 5 minutes of your day, or if you just want to slack off at work, right, and not do work, and you'd like to read the newsletter instead, we don't dictate how you use it, but it's free and it's loaded. You can check out the site. We've got new tools, all sorts of stuff launching. So yeah, just go check out fantasylife.com.
All right, appreciate Dwayne's time as always. Be sure you are subscribed to us on the YouTube machine. It is indeed free. There continues to be content on YouTube that is not available on the audio only feed. Evan and I will be back next episode to talk through our round 1 personal rankings. Be sure you stay tuned for that. For Dwayne, for Evan, for producer Luke, I am Adam. Good luck, everybody.